I first started to try to knit in the car, I was working on socks. And I'm not a big sock knitter. I can knit them. But I was working on them. And I had knit one before we got in the car. And then I'd cast on, started knitting the second one. And then in the car, my gauge got so much tighter. The sock was significantly smaller than the other one. And so I was like, ooh, that's not good. Hello, and welcome to Losing My Knit, Vlogmas 2024, 12 Days of Knitmas, Day 8, Travel Knitting. This is a very broad subject, but it was something that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I have knit on planes, trains, automobiles, boats, subways. I don't do good walking. That's probably the least proficient I am. I feel like I've tried it. I've even tried knitting on our Peloton. That was an experience. Stuck in it, I'm fine. Anything else, not a chance. But I get distracted. I'll either stop knitting and pedal harder, or I'll stop pedaling and knit more. So that didn't last very long when I did that. So I'll start with two funny stories. So I bought this little tripod. I needed a tripod for various reasons, like when we travel. But I bought it recently to record, knowing we were going to be traveling for Thanksgiving, knowing I was going to go to Colorado for work, knowing we were traveling again for Christmas. I was like, oh, maybe I can film myself knitting in various places. And I filmed in the car. It's just sped up me casting on a project. And but then I promptly forgot it when I went to Colorado. Probably a good thing. The plane wasn't really big enough to set it on the table. I did get very lucky on the way out that the middle seat was empty. And then on the way back, it was a bigger seat, but the arm TV table was in the armrest. So like those never, big guy here, those kind of, if they go down, they just barely go down. Even if I sit up perfectly straight or have the chair leaned all the way back. So it wasn't really going to work out. So no big loss on that. But I thought that was kind of funny. The other fun story from this past week when I was in Colorado, so on my way out, I was knitting on my 2x2 Elliott beanie that has glow-in-the-dark thread with it. I don't have it somewhere over there, but I was knitting on that. And, I had the flight attendants always ask, oh, what are you knitting? And I told her. And there was a guy in front of me who, when the flight attendant was chatting with me and we were talking about it, he kind of saw what I was doing, just like it was a lot of a reaction, but it made me happy. It made me giggle a little bit. He didn't ask me about it. I feel like usually when people have that kind of reaction, they ask me about it. So that was on the way out. On the way back, I had actually made some really, really good progress on my Arden pullover test knit. And so I was like, no, I'm doing this. It's a 3.5 hour flight. I can get in at least 3, if not 4 full 8-row repeats. It's cable, so it's like they're not quick repeats. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get it done. And in the airport, a guy actually came up to me and he was like, hey, I don't see very many male knitters. I'm a knitter too. What are you working with? And we chatted for just a quick minute because my boarding group was called. But that was neat. So he chatted me. He was knitting a hat with alpaca. And I do love alpaca. It's so soft. And so we chatted for just a quick minute. And then I got on the plane and I was knitting mine. I sat really, really far towards the front of the plane. So I knew there would be at least one other knitter. I feel like there's always one or two of us. But about after dinner service and drinks and snacks were done, the flight attendant came up and she's like, did you know there's 5 knitters and there's another male knitter and everyone is talking about your sweater? I was like, oh, that's embarrassing, but also kind of cool. I don't usually knit that big of a project on the plane or when I'm traveling unless I'm on a boat. But like I said, I just kind of started it, and I was like, oh, I've got to keep going. I was enjoying it, and I wanted to try and get the whole back done within a week. That was a weird goal that I set for myself. So that was really cool, that apparently I was the talk of the plane, and then I met another male knitter. But that's only the second male who's come up to me and said that they knit or asked, talk to me about it. Our most recent cruise in October, there was this couple walking around. I was knitting in the library, and there was this couple walking around, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. What are they doing? They just kind of keep hovering. And then they sat behind me, and I heard, I guess the non-knitter be like, no, just go up and ask. And the next thing I know, he comes around. He was like, I just wanted to say I think it's so cool that you're knitting. I'm a knitter too, but I don't usually knit on cruises. And, it just makes me so happy to see another guy knitting. And he specifically was like, well, I don't bring knitting because we're cruising to the Caribbean. And I was like, yeah, it can get a little warm. But I was trying to gift knit. I was trying to get 3 shawls, 2 shawls and 1 really big scarf shawl done. So I did have all the wool. I had alpaca. It was very warm. But inside it's usually pretty cold on the ships. But that was kind of a cool thing too. So two male knitters within 3 months. When we travel, I used to, when we first started to travel together, I would always look for used books. You can see kind of way up here. This is my Bronte shelf. And this is my Jane Austen shelf. There's a Harry Potter shelf down here when I used to collect those. But I would collect a book in the language of wherever we were traveling, and I would generally look for Wuthering Heights and Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone. I stopped collecting Harry Potter when Rowling became whatever she is now. But I still collect Wuthering Heights. So, up there I have them from China and Spain and all the Scandinavian countries we went to. And then when I started to get back into knitting, right before the pandemic, I would look for yarn stores. And so those are just, my partner knows those are the stores that I'm going to want to go to, our bookstore and a yarn store. And so we always look, and we always try and tie it into our day. It's hard with yarn stores because they're so, it would be the dream to own a yarn store because I swear they only work from like 10 until 4 most days. And so anyway, so it's hard to tie it in sometimes when you're on a cruise ship and you have a very tight schedule and you're only at port from X until Y. But we generally are able to do it. It's easier when we're traveling not on a cruise ship. But I'm still lucky. I have yarn from all over the world. And so yeah, so I generally, like most people, I go and I ask, once I find the yarn store, I try and look for something local. And I've talked about this before, either local dyed or a brand that I can't get at home or in the US. But a lot of times if I know how many stops we're going to make, so like in Canada a few years ago, I knew we were going to do, I think it was 5 or 6 stops. And so I knew if I got the same weight and the same basic content of the yarn, I would make a shawl out of it. So I do sometimes think ahead like that. The one big exception was Scandinavia. I told you I would show you this. This bag, I love this sheep. Look at this sheep. He just looks so cool. Which is funny because my partner had a goat on our front, coming up our front stairs, and it freaked me out because of its eyes. But, this is a very pretty sheep. This is from Gotland. We went to Visby, Sweden, which is a resort island. I think it was our very last stop of our cruise. And I had done okay, but every yarn store, I was like, I want to buy more. I'm only going to show a couple from here, from our trip. This was our very first one, Hesselgarn. I bought it in, this is the one I got from Finland. This is probably the only one I'm disappointed in. It was the only one they had. It was locally dyed. But it's got silk in it, and never used silk. I'm not the biggest fan of the color, but I wanted a yarn from there. Honestly, I don't know what I'll do with this, but I might, who knows, I'll do something with it. The ones that I really want to show you that I got super excited about are probably at the very bottom when I'm looking at it. This is a massive hang from Estonia. It is that deep. It's almost a black blue up to some very light blues. I got this one and then I got a white one. And there's something, yeah, they're like 240 grams each. A lot more than I thought. Wasn't really paying attention, but it's very exciting to do that. But what I wanted to look for is when we were in Bisbee, we went to a store, one of the yarn stores. And I bought yarn, and then I was like, oh, and then I kept thinking about it. I just kept thinking about it. And I was like, okay, we're going to go back. And we did. So the yarn company is, I'm going to show it to you. I'm not even going to say it. So that's the company. And they spin, ply, and dye their own wool. But what they had that I was super excited about, because I've never done anything with it, was linen. And so I bought 2 hanks of linen. There's this nice rich blue, and then there's this lighter blue. And I don't know, I'm really excited. I'm going to make a bag out of it. I'll probably cast this on next summer. But I was super excited about that when I got that. God, y'all, the cotton yarn is so soft. It's so soft. Yeah, and I just, as you can see, I have a color palette. The teals, if it's a teal, throw it at me. I love it. But yeah, so like that trip was by far the most that I've ever bought in one trip. I planned ahead. I took Ziploc bags, compressed them in order to get everything into both my luggage and back into this bag. I actually got a really cool, really big bag from Estonia. It's like a market bag. I think I carried that back through security. Those are just a couple of favorites that I got on that trip. The only other thing that I was going to kind of talk a little bit about is what I take when I travel. I generally try and keep whatever I'm taking to a smaller bag. That's from Sundragon Art and Fiber in North Carolina. I like it to either be able to roll up and fit in my backpack if they're being super stingy about one carry item, one carry on, one personal item. Occasionally I'll take a bigger one if I have multiple projects going. I generally take something small for the plane. Again, I don't need to be like spread out over multiple people. So a hat, usually a hat. I don't usually do socks, but I always bring this Notions pouch, a little Darth Vader Notions pouch. It's got darning needles, it's got measuring things, measuring tape, it's got a pencil, a couple of stitch markers, and then, these are the needles that I needed for my sweater. So take that. I always bring, since I bought them, my neck lamp. Got it on Amazon, like $9 or $10. Works wonderful, especially if you're working with the darker yarn. I bring one of these. Sometimes they're a pull case. Again, I generally keep one of these with each of my projects, but there's a row counter, a couple of progress keepers, and then a ton of stitch markers. When I'm working on a sweater, I do usually bring a pair of barber cords. These I threw in here, I don't know why, because I knew I wouldn't need them. It's a piece of sweater. But the other thing that I do before I travel is I research sort of what's allowed on the planes, what's not allowed on the planes. I'm very familiar with the TSA guidelines, and even though I fly a lot internally, I will always pull up the page that says what I can and can't have going into a country. But if there's ever any doubt, like if you see anything on Reddit or you see anything online that they might confiscate it, I will either check it or I will take the needles out and put them in with my pencils, or I will put them in, somewhere where they're not like very clear. Some people say you should leave it on a project, and I do agree with that. I used to travel for a long time. I would travel with my full set. So my Delicue, this is my Delicue, my, what are these called? My Chalgu. So I have almost 2 full sets of the 4 and the 5s. And then don't know if this is all of them, but I've got the mini ones. But then I realized a little while ago that if they were like, oh, you have to throw them away, I would be throwing away hundreds of dollars. So now, like you saw in that, my Darth Vader case, I only took the 3 sets that I would need, and I just put them in my pencil case inside my backpack. The only country that I just did not take knitting to was when we visited China quite a while ago. That one was because I knew internally we weren't able to check a bag. We were flying internally. We weren't able to check a bag, and you can't take knitting needles through security, or we couldn't at the time. So I couldn't take a project at all. That was like a 2.5, 3-week trip, so that sucked. But I would rather not have lost my knitting needles or the project. I haven't had only once, I think, flying out of Virginia. They made me pull everything out of my bag and show them what it was. Everywhere else, and that may have been a teaching opportunity for the person running the TSA security line. But everywhere else, they just go right through. I've never had any issues. And so now I just sort of, when we travel, I made these coffee cozies for my team at work this last in November when we traveled down to North Carolina. And then, like I said, I work on hats a lot. I think they're quick knits, and I love them, and they're usually pretty mindless. And if you're a little tight, the gauge kind of settles over the whole project. So what about you? Do you travel? If you do travel, do you like to knit or crochet or craft in the car, or whatever vehicle you're on? I did also used to knit when I was taking public transit a lot. I remember early on when I first moved to Boston, I was knitting a scarf on the bus, and this little girl just came and sat beside me and just watched and didn't ask any questions. And her mom was like, "Is she okay?" I was like, "Yeah, she's fine. She's fine." And I lowered my hands a little bit lower down so she could see what I was doing. It was a very fine yarn. Yeah, that was kind of a fun little thing. So yeah, let me know below what kind of crafting you do when you travel, or if you just use travel as a reset and you don't craft. So I will see you in a couple of days for cruise knitting. I'm casting off for now.